directed the U.S. military to lead an emergency mission to establish a temporary pier in the Mediterranean on the coast of Gaza that can receive large shipments carrying food, water, medicine, and temporary shelter. Just like history watched 3 years ago on January 6th, when insurrectionists stormed this very Capitol and placed a dagger to the throat of American democracy. I'm demanding a ban on assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. The folks at Belvedere, I say, instead of your town being left behind, your community is moving forward again.
All right, as some of what President Joe Biden had to say at last night's State of the Union speech. Did you stay up and watch it? Did you take anything good away from it? Did you have some criticism of it? Would love to see the chats, and of course we'll open things up later on with a live show for you to sound off in the Discord channel. So looking forward to that. But in the meantime, let's go ahead and unpack some of what President Biden had to say. Of course, pretty important speech in his third year, his third State of the Union address in front of a joint session of Congress. And you've got the House controlled by Republicans and the Senate de facto controlled by Democrats because of Kamala Harris being the vice president and therefore the president of the U.S. Senate. But regardless, you've got a split chamber, right? When it comes to the U.S. Congress. So President Biden addressing members of Congress, essentially laying out what he wants to do for the next year. But also all political pundits seeing this as indeed a pitch to the country for another 4-year term as we head into the November election with former President Donald Trump, the presumptive Republican nominee after Nikki Haley dropped out of the Republican primary following Super Tuesday this week. So a lot was on the table for President Biden last night. And he wanted to, I guess, take time to talk about January 6th. Which I think is going to be a bit of a preview of how this will be used politically in the general election season.
In a literal sense, history is watching. History is watching. Just like history watched 3 years ago on January 6th, when insurrectionists stormed this very Capitol and placed a dagger to the throat of American democracy. Many of you are here on that darkest of days. We all saw with our own eyes the insurrectionists were not patriots. They'd come to stop the peaceful transfer of power, to overturn the will of the people. January 6th lies about the 2020 election and the plots to steal the election posed a gravest threat to U.S. democracy since the Civil War. But they failed. America stood. America stood strong, and democracy prevailed. We must be honest. The threat to democracy must be defended. My predecessor and some of you here seek to bury the truth about January 6th.
You did hear that right. He said that this threat to democracy must be defended. Let's see if we can hear that again.
We must be honest. The threat to democracy must be defended. My predecessor and some of you here seek to bury the truth about January 6th.
That's pretty wild. Obviously a misspeak, but people pouncing on it online and sharing that quite a bit. So obviously the president still using January 6th as a political issue, despite those various investigations into it, either by the U.S. Congress or by independent investigators, raising questions about, how much they knew beforehand and whether or not they purposefully had stand downs or how that all played out. But regardless, that's clearly going to be a line in the political narrative heading into November. But you also have the idea of the migrant crisis in the southern U.S. border, and we know that Illinois has been impacted by this quite a bit. And President Biden laying out his ideas on the migrant crisis.
I will not demonize immigrants saying they are poison in the blood of our country. I will not separate families. I will not ban people because of their faith. Unlike my predecessor on my first day in office, I introduced a comprehensive bill to fix our immigration system. Take a look at it. It has all these and more. Secure the border. Provide a pathway to citizenship for dreamers, and so much more. But unlike my predecessor, I know who we are as Americans. We're the only nation in the world with a heart and soul that draws from old and new.
So the president, again, saying that they need to pass that measure that includes money for Ukraine, money for Gaza, but also more money for immigration judges and border patrol and drug confiscation and technology and so on. But that's the southern U.S. border. What about the borders elsewhere throughout the world? The president also announcing last night we're apparently sending troops over to the Middle East.
I'm directing the U.S. military to lead an emergency mission to establish a temporary pier in the Mediterranean on the coast of Gaza that can receive large shipments carrying food, water, medicine, and temporary shelter.
Well, what's the next step after that? Are they going to have boots on the ground and actually have a hot war with the U.S. directly involved? It seems to have really been the case with what's going on in Ukraine when you've got the issue of different types of, what do they call them in Vietnam? They called them, advisors or something to that effect when it came to boots on the ground. So clearly the U.S. embroiled in those conflicts overseas. So far you've heard January 6th, threat to democracy, the southern border, more money for immigration attorneys, more money for Gaza, more money for Ukraine, more money for the Middle East conflict, more money for other parts of the world, but he also talked about the issue of violent crime and how he feels the issue needs to be addressed. Here's President Joe Biden last night.
I'm demanding a ban on assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. Pass universal background checks. None of this. I taught the Second Amendment for 12 years. None of this violates the Second Amendment or vilifies responsible gun owners.
What does, though, vilify responsible gun owners is this report that apparently is rather interesting to see. You got ex-user Patrick Webb breaking. The federal government's been illegally surveilling and building profiles for Americans in secret portals called DCAC for those who oppose firearm restrictions, lockdowns, and vaccine mandates, and or support border security, and labeling them as domestic terrorists. This is clearly something that's, you see this portal, and this has been reported, the potential shifts in various policies. Many DVEs, domestic violent extremists, may perceive to oppose or threaten their ideological goals and agendas, or feed into existing narratives.
Great comeback stories, Belvedere.
We'll get to that. Many DVEs subscribe to regarding the U.S. government's excessive power, influence, and initiatives, possibly including firearm legislation, the easing of immigration restrictions, and new limits on the use of public land. Some DVEs discontent with renewed measures to mitigate the spread of COVID-19, the order disseminating of COVID-19 vaccinations, and the efficiency of those particular vaccinations, and so on. Lone actor, homegrown violent extremist indicators developed prior to FinSec's analysis. So clearly some analysis being done on how they categorize certain people in the country who may be opposed to, for instance, firearm registrations, regulations, bans, and so on. But the president also, he took a look at a city in Illinois. Here's President Joe Biden from last night.
Great comeback stories, Belvedere, Illinois. Home to an auto plant for nearly 60 years. Before I came to office, the plant was on its way to shutting down. Thousands of workers feared for their livelihoods. Hope was fading. Then I was elected to office, and we raised the Belvedere repeatedly with auto companies, knowing unions would make all the difference. The UAW worked like hell to keep the plant open and get these jobs back, and together we succeeded. Instead of auto factories shutting down, auto factories reopening, and new state-of-the-art battery factories being built to power those cars there at the same. The folks of Belvedere, I say, instead of your town being left behind, Your community is moving forward again.
So getting a little bit of a spotlight on Belvedere. That's always interesting to see on a national spotlight. So, yes, there's the president talking about sending troops over to Gaza, reminiscing about January 6th, saying this, which is being plastered all over the internet.
We must be honest. The threat to democracy must be defended. We must be honest. The threat to democracy must be defended.
So you'll clearly hear a lot more about that, I imagine. But don't forget about this as well, where the president made clear what his initiatives are going to be in the next 4 years.
I'm demanding a ban on assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. Pass universal background checks. None of this. None of this. I taught the Second Amendment for 12 years. None of this violates the Second Amendment or vilifies responsible gun owners.
While he has those sentiments, you've got sentiments elsewhere across the country, with South Carolina being the 29th state to allow for constitutional carry. So indeed, interesting to see this. And the map, again, continues to show more and more of the country is going the way of constitutional carry. So now more than half of the country is constitutional carry. So South Carolina passing that. So there you go. Just a kind of a review of where we're at, I guess, in the grand scheme of things here with Bishop on Air. All right, be sure to follow along anywhere. Just search Bishop on Air. You can go to the website, bishoponair.com, and join us there. So make it happen, all right? Greatly appreciate you guys being here each and every weekday morning. Again, I'm Greg Bishop. Thanks for hanging out, and we've got more coming up. And when we're doing the live show, be sure to go check out the Discord channel, where you can go and join us and sound off on these issues and more. So stay tuned. That's coming up here with Bishop on Air.